I mean, firstly, we'd love to hear just a bit more about Mama Muse and the work that you guys do. It sounds really incredible and like how long you've been on this journey and what made you start your initiative.
Yeah, I mean, just to start, like this journey has always been part of my life, and I didn't realize it. I mean, womanhood is, a condition for being on this Mama Muse journey. And what I realized was super young is that, I grew up in a violent household. I grew up mistreated by men and boys. And everyone said that's normal. My mom said that was normal, right? But like implicitly, like I knew, despite all this harm and normalization around this culture, that like I knew it was wrong. And so I went through a really awful, awful, awful breakup and got out of an awful, violent relationship with another male student who went to Harvard actually 6 months ago. And what I realized is I was writing a lot about, free writing my emotions, but I also took a feminist philosophy course at Harvard. And I realized that I was putting all this time into, writing my emotions, the way I view the world, how we all should kind of, take different perspectives and understand the different dynamics that under that underlie all our relationships with men, with women. And I just started sharing them on LinkedIn because I felt like it was like I just didn't want it to only just be submitted to my professor and never see it again. Like I really just wanted it to, get some traction, or I wanted to see if it resonated with people. Am I crazy? Like, is this normal? And that's actually how I met my co-founder, Lucy Nichols, who's actually an Australian. She's from Sydney, and we met because I tagged Cindy Gallop. I don't know if you guys are familiar with her work. She's the godmother of sex tech, and I wrote about deepfake porn about 8 months ago when it first started gaining public um, opinion on it, and that's when Cindy reposted my post because it resonated with her. And that's how my co-founder, Lucy, found me. And then from there, we just felt like there were all these perspectives of women getting drowned out either by algorithmic bias or because like a lot of times like I wanted to write a paper and, propose to submit it to a journal, like an academic journal. And it's like, no academic journal will accept something about sex or sexual communication. And so there's this academic censorship, which we've seen a lot with, Israel Palestine, feminism, where all these different, academic opinions that and dialogues and discussions that in certain ways challenge our normative ways of thinking just get silent. So what Lucy and I started doing with MAMAMUSE is we just started inviting like philosophers, academics, technologists, founders, all these different people that had one thing in common, that they were all trying to address this bind of femininity, like why is being feminine bad in any shape or form, and who are getting censored for talking about it. And what we realize is, we can't keep begging Meta, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all of them to see us as complete complex human beings and beg them to change their algorithms and change their technical practices. We need to take initiative and build our own community ourselves. And that's kind of what we've been doing now for the past few months, is just building these communities and starting a conversation, which I think is something so important. Like I love Cindy Gallop. Like I started following her when I first created LinkedIn because she was the first person on social media that was an adult, not just a young teenager, talking about sex on a business platform. Because like sex is business, right? Like it underlies how we look at women. It's how we interact with the opposite sex, but we never talk about it in a safe, appropriate academic setting. And so I really fell in love with her work when I was already in high school. So like the fact that she reposted my post and that's how I met my co-founder is kind of showing how like the stars aligned. And yeah, so I think that's the work what MAMAMUSE is doing, is elevating uncensored voices, because the feminine has just been so censored, self-censorship, algorithmic in real life. And I think it's finally like I feel like around the world we're seeing this, visceral reaction, to, women's rights being taken away. Women are not having children, most like most developed countries, especially America, are suffering a birth strike, which they don't want to call it that. They want to call it fertility rates are dropping. But in reality, women are tired, and there's no way women can communicate. They don't understand what they're feeling, but they know something's wrong. And that's where MAMAMUSE has kind of stepped in to be like, we'll help you, take you there to learn a little more about things that your parents won't talk to you about, your teachers won't talk to you about, people who you trust don't feel comfortable talking to you about. And that's kind of what we want to be, this safe space where trusted members of our community stand as guardians of, you know, education and bringing people to learn more about these different things.
Oh, that's super, super interesting. And yeah, awesome work that you're doing, Daniela. So yeah, well done.
And I'm just reiterating the sentiment that Hannah just mentioned. It is so awesome to see this work that you've been completing. And I would be curious, what is the biggest hindrance that you have faced while creating MAMAMUSE? And obviously the last couple of months, as you have mentioned, you've been creating this community. But what has been the biggest roadblock that you've experienced so far when it comes to your solution? And does it involve other stakeholders, or is it primarily as like founders yourself? Have you experienced that roadblock?
Yeah, I think this roadblock, I'm just gonna say it front and clear, it's censorship, and it's the fact that everyone's on these social media platforms and it's really hard to get them off them, right? So I think this is a problem many women's fem tech founders, sex tech founders, anyone who works within the bounds of women's issues has experienced censorship, and it's really hard. I actually wrote a research paper. I took a class at Harvard Law School, and for my final research paper, I talked about modern day violence against women through censorship, right? And I specifically focus on women's reproductive and sexual health ads, but the censorship goes on to so many different angles of womanhood to femininity to feminism, the word feminism getting flagged by Meta. And so I think, but I specifically focus on women's reproductive and sexual health ads. And that's what we realized with MAMAMUSE too, is like, when I talk to a VC firm, or when I talk to anyone who's in the traditional venture capital or founder ecosystem, which I rarely do because we have completely different mindsets on how the space should operate. But when I do speak to them, you know, they ask like these conventional, you know, questions like, what are you, how many followers do you have? What are your metrics? What's your engagement like? What are your impressions? And like the hardest part about MAMAMUSE is like, we do not use those as our standard metrics of success because we're getting censored, right? Like when Instagram is shadow banning you, how can you be using engagement and reach and organic followers and all these different traditional social media metrics to measure your engagement and your success? And so that's something that I've talked to a lot of women's health founders, you know, who will pay thousands of dollars to get these ad consultants to help them figure out, how do I not get my ads banned? And then in a week or two, their ad accounts will get completely banned. Their social media accounts will get completely banned, and they lose all their followers and all their reach just like that. And they cannot get it back, right? They can't get those followers back. They can't get those posts back. And so it's about rebuilding. And that's what I think is the issue that we've tried to address by creating our platform to invite these founders, is that we're trying to provide a space where these founders can, you know, share their research in a way where they're not going to have their reach taken away from them. But it's a risk. And as a small, you know, organization like MAMAMUSE is, like, we do not have millions of followers like Meta and like Instagram and TikTok have, right? So like like we are little tech and you're competing against big tech. Like the way the system is working, like the tech ecosystem is working, like you're going to lose, right? Like, why would they invest in a smaller tech company that does not have nowhere near like as much reach as these bigger tech companies? And I think that's a problem we're facing is, you know, we want to create our own ecosystem, but then a big part of that is leaving the one, and like having people leave those ecosystems is hard because you do everything. People shop for groceries. They do all these different things now with TikTok and Instagram, things that were not possible even 2-3 years ago. So I think things are changing quickly and we're becoming more dependent on these bigger platforms. And I think it's something that's concerning, but they have us all at our necks, right? Like, what can we do about it, right? And so I think that's the biggest challenge that we've kind of been going through, is like, we've been developing this community, but it's hard because we can't solve their biggest pain point, right? Like, it's not up to us. We can just give our own platform, but that platform doesn't have as much reach as other ones do.
And just jumping off that as well, like in terms of providing that safe space, especially online, what do you think the ideal, like in your ideal world, what would the perfect digital world look like in terms of social media, you know, dating apps, gaming services or streaming services, that kind of stuff? What do you picture as hopefully in the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different approaches to answer this question, but I think I'm gonna go with a perfect, like, say, like, very standard, like, safe for women. Like, you know, you can post a picture and, like, you do not need to feel like you need to wear a bikini. You do not need to feel like you need to be on Instagram all the time. You do not need to feel like you need to present yourself as a certain way. And I think that's just like my baseline, is like, just make it safe for women. Like, make it safe that we feel like we can trust our image. So does that mean we have a digital signature so that we know this is our image, we own it, and if anyone, you know, uses it, manipulates it, we know that it's manipulated and we can identify that. That's an approach, one way to make sure that, like, women's images are safely, you know, shared online. But I think with online communication, like, I forgot who said this, but there's a quote that, like, the internet is just a reflection of society. And, like, you know, to say a perfect digital world would mean, like, we have perfect relationships with each other in real life, you know? And I think that's the biggest issue, is like, men don't respect women, and men can be anonymous. Like, in real life, they would never say those things to women, but through social media accounts, they can create a million fake accounts and say whatever they want and never face any accountability. And I think that just only exacerbates the real life experiences we have with men, and the growing rates of domestic violence, you know, domestic homicides, and all these, like, these femicides that we're witnessing all around the world, all over the news. And I think that's a product of these online platforms just harnessing this violence and doing nothing about it. So I think it's a big part, is like recognizing that, to promote safe online behaviors, and literally just respect women for who they want to be. If they want to be skinny, you know, thick, smart, dumb, do this, do that, like, just respecting women for who they are is a critical first step. And that happens outside the internet, because people just carry their darkest grievances onto the internet, and they can execute them lightning speed, no accountability, whenever they want, however they want. And I think that's the problem. And a big part of that is, like, education in real life. Like, we need people, like, here. I think the answer is not in the digital, but it's more in the physical. And I think that's something people don't want to hear, but that's the reality.
And that's such a very unique statement that you've mentioned there. It starts in the physical. And I have a follow-up on that question. The majority of the tech ecosystem and tech founders in general, a lot of the time, we don't really have many considerations for the ultimate end user, and we're often operating in this business mindset. But obviously, having such a passionate mission statement as MAMAMUSE has, what is something that you can say to tech founders across the ecosystem that they can effectively translate solutions to benefit a better digital society?
Hire more women. It's just so simple. Like, the way I see, like I go to Harvard, and the way I see men will vouch for each other if they're in certain social organizations or sport teams, you know, not contingent upon any merit per se, but they just, with their intuition, they trust their boys, they trust their guy friends. Like, that trust is completely non-existent for women, and women have to compensate so much and so hard to build that respect and that trust that men get pretty much automatically if they're friends with another guy. And they will vouch, they will hire, they will go out of their way. And we do not see the same thing for women. And it's just this expectation gap that, a guy can do little to nothing to gain that respect and gain, a position they would not gain if they didn't have those connections and that respect. Whereas women, they have to work so much harder, have so much experience. And I think it's just hiring more women. It's not a complex solution. Like, that's the biggest thing, my biggest problem with all this. Like, people try making it complex. Like, we do not need more women in STEM. Like, we do not need more women in tech. Like, there's tons of women whose perspective, like, you do not need to be a technologist to fix tech. Like, from what we can see with the tech ecosystem is if we have all these super high IQ tech bros building things, they're just building and creating such harmful things, right? Because there is no human-centered design in what they're building, right? And you don't fix technology with people who just have those type of mindsets, right? Like, you don't fix technology with technology, in my opinion. You need more human-centered mindsets. And whether women have been socialized to have feminine qualities or do they innately have feminine qualities, we can talk about that all day. But the reality is, women just bring different perspectives because we live different experiences. And that's a result of legacies of oppression, legacies of neglect. And with that, we carry different perspectives. And with that, we just need to be at the table, right? Like, you wouldn't like and this happens in medicine all the time, where they just create solutions for women where they don't even test the solutions on women. Like, it just makes no sense. Like, it just makes no sense. And so I think the answer isn't hard. Just hire more women, give women those chances, like, let those women take those risks and, like, see what's going to happen. Because I guarantee you, the biggest fear and the reaction that I constantly see with these tech pros is, if we hire all these women, they're going to be so incompetent and all these XYZ things. But it's like, I personally believe that if we hire even the least qualified women can do less harm than the most qualified men, right? And I just think we need to just take those leap of faith, because I really don't think women can cause as much harm as we've been witnessing and experiencing in these digital ecosystems.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I just wanted to touch on something you said right at the start, about bringing different sectors and different people from different fields on board. How do you think the best way to do that? I know you just talked about creating a safe space and people to come together. And also, I think what we're trying to do at Eiris is bridge that gap between academia and then also industry and also the wider community. So having access to these resources rather than just, like, submitting it to a journal and that information, what are you actually doing with that info? How do you see that going forward at MAMAMUSE, like how to bring everyone on board and everyone kind of on the same page, working towards the same goal?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the way I think about it is all these different fields are solving the same problems and just have different approaches, right? And so I think at Harvard, there's a very collaborative community and things are becoming more collaborative. And I think that's what I like about entrepreneurship specifically, is because you bring together all these different people. You don't only work with finance people, you don't only work with software engineers, you have to create this community and your team. And I see that with MAMAMUSE, and it's hard, but I think at the same time, like, people are willing to learn if help out if you want to learn and listen. So I think the way I've been going about it is just reaching out and just, sharing, like, read their work, right? And I think it's like genuinely be interested and like I read, I study neuroscience and philosophy, and I read a lot about, like, gender from a neurobiological perspective. And then I read philosophy and I learn about all the societal biases that affect medicine and how we interpret research. And, like, hand in hand, it's just given me such an enriched perspective on how to, understand the things I'm reading. And so I think a big part of that is just, read, but also just be interested and listen. Like, you don't have time to read everything. Like, that's my biggest problem with it. You literally can't read everything. It's impossible. But I think you can reach out to people and be interested and listen and take people's time. And to do that on a corporate sense, I'm not too familiar because MAMAMUSE hasn't done that. We're more just about, interviewing people, documenting conversations. But I think it is about just, like, getting people who are collaborative and, like, truly collaborative. Like, everyone says they're collaborative, but I think collaborative means, like, bringing together people with completely different views on how to solve a problem. So like bringing in a philosopher and bringing in, you know, a software engineer. I'm bringing in a mathematician. I'm bringing in a woman in gender studies, you know, professor. And I think it's about really allowing these people to like freely ask questions without judgment. And I think that's the biggest concern with people is like there is this hierarchy of like who's right and who's wrong. And I think it just needs to be put away to recognize where people are coming from. But it is challenging. And I just would say like just start reaching out and like just start building your network around like a problem rather than like a field. I mean, yeah, like a field. Like I think if you want to learn more about like me, like women's rights, like learn about like all the different professors studying women's rights from the math department, philosophy department. And I think that's like a good start.
I don't know about you, Hannah, but I'm feeling heavily inspired. Like
Yeah.
I'm ready to seize the day. So thank you, Daniela. You're very passionate and it comes through um, a lot as well. And you've made some really powerful statements throughout this entire recording as well. So thank you.